Guys, this week we had Jeremy Baber on. He's a physical therapist here in town at Lakeland, Florida. He works, though, with a very unique set of skills, mostly on neurological healing. What that means is that he takes an approach that's not as orthopedic as traditional physical therapy, but actually takes an approach to help chronic pain with our brain neurologically. So he's created an entire assessment. He's created a patch that he uses with his clients to actually allow turning on signals to help muscles break off the roadblocks in order to be able to have stronger and more functional signals going from your brain to particular muscles so that you can heal and get back to feeling like an athlete again. So take a quick listen, enjoy. If you enjoy this podcast, please like and subscribe or share with friends. It helps us grow and share our message of making Comeback Athlete a greater platform to help more people. Thanks. All right, guys, I'm here today with my friend Jeremy. We met probably like 4 months ago. I had back issues for a little over a year, and two of my clients referred me to you. And I was at a point where I just said, heck, I'll try anything. And you had this different approach, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. But let's just say my back's felt better than it's felt in like 2 years. And because of that, I wanted to invite you on the podcast for any local Lakelander clients of mine who are dealing with any kind of pain. Jeremy's got a very unique, different approach to managing and healing chronic pain that we're going to go through. But before we dive into that, we just wanted to kind of welcome you on and to the Comeback podcast. And we wanted to talk a little bit about your story, how you started out in physical therapy and how you kind of created this new method. So Jeremy, welcome. Invite us into the story of like your journey, where you went to school and then where you started practicing and then kind of where we got to with your new method.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on, Blake. I really appreciate it. My name is Jeremy Baber. I'm a physical therapist. I practice for, let me do the math on this, 2002 to present time. So, oh my God, 24 years. Um, so I went to University of Florida. I started off in the business school, and I found out by my senior year, I just wasn't that into business. And somebody told me to check out physical therapy. I really didn't know about the profession at that time. And once I started volunteering, I knew that this was a better fit for me than working in a bank or working for a company. So I went to PT school, graduated 2002, and then I moved to Atlanta. So I basically researched all the companies in Atlanta, and I found one that did something really unique. They did outpatient orthopedics, and they also did Broadway tours. So I specifically kind of targeted that practice, went to work for them, and I got a job working for a show called Moving Out, which was a Broadway tour. It was like a rock ballet, so it was the music of Billy Joel and the choreography of Twyla Tharp, and that's how I ended up in Lakeland because my wife was in that show, and so she went to Harrison, and yeah, we kind of hit it off. We're both from Florida, and that's kind of how I ended up, in Lakeland. But after working for that show, like I started off in outpatient orthopedics, like a lot of physical therapists. I did, post-op, ACLs, meniscal tears, discectomies. So it was your basic standard orthopedic types of, injuries, that sort of thing. And then when I followed my wife to New York City, that was in 2008. Um, I took a job in a chronic pain clinic, and that was kind of a turning point in my career. Um, it was that period of time where I basically had a lot of very tough patients. So, prior to 2008, 2009, I had a very traditional approach. It was exercise, stretching, manual therapy. I had really good outcomes. I was used to working with, a more athletic population. And so in those earlier days, I think I was treating simpler cases. It just, people seemed to respond, people got better. But when I took the job in a chronic pain clinic, everything kind of changed. So I was working in one of the top pain management clinics in New York City. The majority of the people that I saw there had already done physical therapy 2 or 3 times. And I thought that physical therapy school had prepared me to help that type of clientele. And I found out very shortly within working in that practice that my skills weren't up to snuff to help people with very tough presentations, people who had already done therapy multiple times. I'm coming in basically doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result, and that's basically the definition of insanity.
Yeah. Yeah. When you would see those people, um, you know, you said there's oftentimes this was like not their first rodeo going through some sort of physical therapy. Did you start to sense that like a lot of people became full of despair and kind of like nothing's going to work and like their attitude was even just like I'll try this but I have like this just because there's nothing else I can do or it gives a little bit of relief but doesn't necessarily fix it. What was your experience with that?
Yeah, so I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Uh, Obviously, these people had done therapy 2 or 3 times, so they kind of knew what to expect. And here I am coming doing the exact same stuff that didn't work for them. So they were kind of so at that point they know it's pretty much going to have the same outcome. And so that was frustrating because I was doing everything by the book and was not getting the outcomes I was expecting. And then those patients were, weren't really expecting much out of me because I wasn't really doing anything different. And so at that point, I realized like these people have done therapy 2 or 3 times. I mean, there must be something I'm missing. But I had really absolutely, no clue what it was at that time. So it was at that time after spending about 6 months in that practice where I would say my caseload was 80% of failed cases, people who've done therapy multiple times. I just realized that there's something different about these people because they're literally paying. This is a cash based practice in New York City. People are paying top dollar to be seen by skilled therapists, and they're looking for a solution. And they're frustrated. I'm frustrated. I mean, I think I'm just as frustrated as them because I want to be able to help them. And then not being able to help that clientele um, was very frustrating, and it was humbling because I realized I didn't have the skills to help those people. And it was at that point I started studying chronic pain as a specialty, and I learned that I was basically barking up the wrong tree. What I had been taught in school prior to that point was to treat everything like it was an orthopedic issue. Like the problem was in the
Mm,
muscle, the joint, the tissue. What I've subsequently learned over the last, 20 years is that the body's like a computer system. You have hardware and software. And what we tend to do in therapy is we focus on the hardware, the muscles, the joints, the tendons. They didn't teach me how to analyze the software system. I had to go
mm,
study a lot of different eclectic techniques. So when I left that practice in '09, from '09 to 2012, I spent about 40 grand on continuing education. I flew all over the country. I went up to Canada for 6 months and studied with one of the top chronic pain experts in the world. And it totally revamped my approach. I knew what the problem was. And, I'll talk more about that. But, you know, for me, not being able to help those people left me feeling helpless as a therapist, but I felt worse off for those people because if that was my brother, my sister, my father, and not being able to help them was frustrating. And so I still
yeah.
think about some of those people. Well, not today because now I know exactly, pretty much exactly what to do with them that I didn't know 20 years ago. But what kept me up, in '09, in '10 was not being able to help those people. I couldn't remember my successes. I could only really remember my failures. And I think that's what drives a lot of people who are trying to be great is they don't harbor on their success. They basically are driven by, failures and trying to kind of take things to a new level.
Yeah. So take us into you spent $40,000 flying to Canada all over the place trying to figure out and study chronic pain. Where did you kind of like the light bulb went off for you with the approach you have? And then let's get into explaining what that is and how you started practicing that.
So in '09, let's see, '09, I left that practice. 2010, so I started studying chronic pain, looking at the specialties in chronic pain. And there was a group out of Australia called NOI. Sorry, but they're called, sorry, I forgot what their initials stand for. It's a Neuro Orthopedic Institute. That's it. Um, and so there are two therapists there in Australia, Lorimer Mosley and David Butler. And they're really well known in the physical therapy world. But in 2009, they were teaching a course called Explain Pain. And I'd never heard about it. Today in school, they teach this concept. But when I was, basically a clinician with under a decade of experience, I'd never heard of these concepts. So I went down to Washington, D.C. I took the course, and that course totally changed everything. It was like a fork in the road. Like I
Yeah.
hit this fork. I could go one way or other way. I could basically go orthopedic, like everything is the problems in the muscle, the joint, and the tendon, or I could say the problems in the nervous system. So I was talking earlier that the body's like a computer system. You have hardware, you have software. The software, the hardware are your muscles, your joints, your tendons. The software are the signals from your nervous system and your brain to those muscles, joints, and tendons that make the move and also create pain perception. So ultimately, every movement that you create, every pain, tightness that you feel in your body is an electrical signal from your nervous system. And so,
Mm.
since the brain and the nervous system is the number one generator of movement and pain, it kind of makes sense to start there rather than starting with the hardware, because you can have a computer, but if you don't have the right software to run the hardware is not going to work. Well, it's the same thing with the
Mm.
body. So, in terms of pain is basically an output, not an input. You can have an injury to an area, but that signal goes up from your tissue, up through your spinal cord to your brain, and then your brain will analyze that threat and decide if it needs to generate a pain response. Now, if you basically got a hangnail, small little hangnail hurts like hell. So if you got, that hangnail there, you're going to be focusing on it. But if there's a lion or tiger or bear across the room, your brain's not going to give two hoots about that hangnail. It's going to get you moving. So your brain's going to
Right.
prioritize the signals that are coming into your body and determine whether or not it needs to generate a pain response. And so that was really interesting. I never heard these, sort of things. And so essentially, like, pain is like a sensation in your body, but it's like heat, it's like cold. There is a thermostat in your nervous system that ramps up and ramps down pain response. So some people who have what we call sensitive nervous systems, their nervous system is too good at generating a pain signal. And what I find, or what the research says, is that basically 6 months to a year out from your injury, your tissues are healed. If your pain signal or your pain response is basically the same, if you had the same pain for over a year, there's a good chance it's being perpetuated by an over sensitized nervous system. And so these are things that I'd never heard before. And at the end of that course, one of the top chronic pain experts in the world is a guy named Adrian Liu, who is from South Africa, but he moved to Iowa, and he has a pain institute in Iowa. He closed that course, and he said this. He said, "Your job as a therapist is not to treat the painful joint. Your job as a therapist is to treat the neural representation of that joint in the brain." And once I heard that, I was like, "Holy crap! I now know what I'm supposed to do." How you do it was a completely, like, different problem, because at that point there wasn't a roadmap. Like, there isn't a clear instructions of how you end chronic pain. Step one, step two, step three. I've actually been working on that for the last 16 years. Like, this problem, I've been trying to solve it, and it's hard to explain. But, like, part of the background of my background is when I worked in New York City, I had a lot of wealthy clientele. I used to go out to the Hamptons. I've had treated multiple, like, famous people, and the reason why I was able to work with that type of clientele is because I can produce results fast. Like, and I think you can speak to this, is that I have techniques and tools that I can create changes in minutes that sometimes
Yeah.
weeks or months of exercise can't change. And that's the crazy and cool thing about the brain, is that with the right stimulus, you can change the brain in minutes or seconds. But with tissue based approach, like if you're trying to work out, it's going to take 4, 6, 8 weeks to kind of create a tissue change. But if it's
Yeah.
just electrical response that you're trying to manipulate, if you put the right input into the nervous system, it can change fast. And so it's kind of wild to see somebody's chronic pain that they've had for months or years change in a single session. And that's not every person I treat, but it's a high percentage where I can create functional changes fast. And it's because I'm basically trying to give them a software upgrade, which is not the way most therapists are, trained or thinking. Um,
Yeah. No, I can attest to that and that experience of like walking out our first session and feeling 90 times better. uh, which was like not my expectation. Now, I think some of our viewers or listeners might really be curious, like you had alluded to kind of the muscular, like orthopedic approach, trying to go after the tissue. versus like the hard or the hardware, which would be like the brain, or maybe I said that backwards. But how would you help someone decipher if they have a hardware issue or a software issue? And then like how and like what would be some of the good signs to be like, hey, this is one where you should probably see me for a software issue, versus like just doing the hardware stuff, go get massages, self myofascial release, crossover symmetry work and try needling, right? Like how would you help someone decipher those?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. From my perspective, is like if the injury is less than 3 months old, then you basically are in that point where you're allowing the tissues to heal, remodel. You're in that paradigm where it's basically not chronic. Like anything 3 months or less, it's not chronic pain. But once you start getting 3, 4, 5, 6 months out and the pain's not getting better, now you're trending to a point where the tissues are very dominant early on in an injury, but then after that 3 month, 4 month mark, now the tissue problem is decreasing. But what happens is the neurological portion, like the neurological portion, is low. But the longer the pain is there, the more the scales are tipped towards it being neurological. So for me, if somebody's got a pain issue that they dealt with over 6 months and it's not improving, 6 months is a lot more than enough time for your body's tissues to heal.
Right.
Why it doesn't heal is that you know your your brain may be protecting that area. So sometimes your brain will put a parking brake neurologically on that area. And just because the tissues have healed doesn't mean your brain's released the parking brake from that area. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is try to figure out, do you have parking brakes set in your nervous system? And that's why I've developed these different screening techniques and different assessments to kind of differentiate if it's a nervous system problem or it's an orthopedic or joint problem.
Yeah. And so like even with me, like I found that like I had those parking brakes up for a long period of time. And so I created a lot of muscle atrophy in particular areas because I have been just training and not able to activate those. So a lot of the experience with the Babber method is really just like when you turn those back on, you actually can strengthen those areas and fire, like for me as an athlete, in a way that you want to fire again. That was my experience. But let's jump now a little bit. That was really helpful. So you've done all this. You're kind of like you had that fork in the road moment in DC. You're really getting after trying to figure out where's the breakthrough. Where did you kind of come up with the Babber method, and then what is that so people can kind
Well,
of
I'm gonna.
understand? And there's a few tools.
Oh, so I'm gonna apologize. It's pronounced Baber. It's like B-A, like Bay. It's okay because like
Sorry.
I get babbered all the time. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
But it's all good. So yeah, it's so how did I come up with the method? So in '09, I knew that there's a problem with the way most physical therapists were approaching the problem. Like we weren't given tools to kind of assess the nervous system. And so the number one reason why we have brains and we think it's to think or to solve problems, the number one reason you have a brain, and this is from a neuroscientist, is that the number one reason brains exist is to produce meaningful movement. We can't interact with our environment without producing a movement. So in terms of studying how to affect movement from a brain-based perspective, is how it all started. So one of the where I started in '09 was I used what's called opposite side training. So like if you're stuck in a cast, your arm's going to atrophy in 3 to 4 weeks. But what they found is if you exercise the opposite limb, you can mitigate atrophy. You'll actually, even though this arm's in a sling, it'll pick up 50% of the strength gain of that opposite arm for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then at some point, that arm's got to move. But one of the things I did early on was I would figure out what movement pattern that person couldn't produce or couldn't was struggle with, and I would analyze that movement pattern and figure out which muscles weren't firing, and then I'd have them fire it, train it on the opposite side, and that that technique is effective, but it's still limited. But in terms of how I came up with the Baber method, it started off with trying to fix movement. Now, I realized like there's millions of movements that the body can make. How do you prioritize what's important? And that's why I really early on studied the work of this guy named Gray Cook. Have you ever heard of Gray Cook?
Yeah.
So Gray Cook, functional movement system. He created some sort of this screen called the FMS, functional movement screen. And it was at that point I was like, I want to create a screen for the motor cortex, which is like, where do you even begin with that? Like, then that's where I started. I started to create a screen for the motor cortex. and it started off with 10 movements. And I had this thing I called the GPS, the global performance screen. And so I picked what I thought were the 10 best movements for, screening motor function. And then, so I had that screen, but then I figured out something that I don't think anybody's kind of figured out yet, is that, or really thought about much, is that when we move, we have two systems of movement. When I move this arm, it's my right hemisphere. When I move my left arm, my right hemisphere is controlling that. But when I move both arms at the same time in what's called a bimanual task, both hemispheres have to communicate. And so there's
Mm.
a muscle called the quadratus laborum. Yours was shut off. Everybody with back pain that I treat has their quadratus laborum shut off. I used to use a manual technique to kind of turn it back on and activate it by basically releasing trigger points around that area and on the opposite side of the body. But what's fascinating is that even though I gave people exercises and did this manipulation, this one muscle would keep shutting off. It would just flip from side to side. It was so frustrating. And I was like, you know what? There's got to be a way to turn on this muscle with a movement. And so I started analyzing the function of the QL. It basically abducts the legs. So I was like, okay, what happens if I get people to fire their QL? Now, at this time, I was watching a lot of TED Talks. And so there's this lady, I don't know if you ever heard of her. Her name's Amy Cuddy. And she did
No.
this podcast, or sorry, this TED Talk, where she's talking about power poses. So she would have people stand up and she would do or you can't see it, but like Superwoman, Superman, like you would basically puff yourself up and you'd get into what she would call power poses. And so I was like, what happens if I get everybody to power pose? Will their QL turn on? Nope, it didn't. But it sparked an idea in my head. And so what I did was, instead of doing her power pose, I had everybody basically take up as much space as they could maximally standing and separate their legs far and basically turn their body into a giant X. And so this was the first pattern for the neural activation screen. It's called the big X. When you abduct your legs, like if I'm abducting my legs, it forces the QL on each side to activate. And so what I was doing was basically mirroring the function of the lower body. But when I had them fire and do the same thing with their upper body, it was after we did that, the QL turned on automatically. And so then I tested this out on college tennis players. I was out in the Hamptons. I was working with some college tennis players. Every single one of these D1 tennis players, guys from Stanford, guys from I don't know, other Virginia, all had a low back muscle that was shut off. These are 20-year-old top college players. I had them all do the big X all at the same time, and every one of their QLs turned on. And it was at that point I was like, okay, I'm on to something here. There must be a pose for every single muscle in the body. And this is where I started. And I spent the next 2.5 years mapping out these different circuits in the body and the brain. And so I developed something called the neural activation screen. It took about 2 years to figure out these patterns, because the patterns don't look like normal exercises. You've done them, like the butterfly, the big X, the zombie. They don't look like normal exercises. I had to map those things out to see what circuits were connected to what, because your brain doesn't see muscles. This is what people don't understand. The brain does not see muscles, it sees patterns. And so what I had to do was figure out what pattern or position would stimulate certain muscles. So I was able to map out these circuits in the body, and I developed a screen to map out these circuits. And the screen works because I've tested it out on, personally thousands of people. But from 2021 to 2024, I worked for a company in Chicago, and I wrote their chronic pain program. And we had one of the top outcomes for chronic back pain in the world for a digital program. And so every year, even up until present time, thousands of people go through that program. And in that program, we averaged 80% improvement in chronic back pain in 8 weeks. Now, we were competing against huge companies like Hinge Health and Sword, billion-dollar companies. Their algorithm averaged like a 68% improvement in 12 weeks. So we got better improvement in less time. And the only difference between our program and their program is we started off with these brain-based exercises that I developed for the first 4 weeks, and then we shifted to more traditional therapy. So ours was like brain training first. We train the brain first and the body second, and that's why that program works so much better than the standard fare. And that's the same approach I take today. I train the brain first because everybody's skipping that step.
Yep.
And I train the body second.
That makes total sense too, as like a personal trainer, because when I take a new client, we actually slow them down so that their brain can catch up to the patterns that we're trying to create. in the movements, because when people start out and they want to go fast and do hit fit, what happens is they're going so fast that their nervous system cannot keep up with the patterns. And so they do faulty movement, right? They're only going to be right. Cause we've known this even in strength and conditioning world where our body wants to take the path of least resistance. Well, the problem is that's fine until you hurt. And
Mm.
what you've done is you step in and you rewire that, right? So that that pain can go away, so that we can turn on more of the muscles, so that we can actually activate things and not have them turn back off. So, yeah, and I feel like so much of what I love about your method and what you've created, what you've discovered in your hard work is that it's wild to me that like there's ways to manipulate that physical therapy has done forever that like can kind of turn something on for a little bit and then it shuts back off. So there's like kind of these band-aid methods. This to me was like such a great idea, but like I think I only saw you in person maybe 5 times and felt like I just started going to you for more different stuff that I'm like, well, like my hamstring's not really firing very well either. Let's try this out. But I really came to you for back pain. And I think that was cleared up in like 2 or 3 sessions. Where traditionally when I've gone to other places, it's like I have to go for weeks on weeks, maybe 6 weeks before I start really feeling anything better, and sometimes not at all. So yeah. So we talked a little bit about the neural activation screen, right? Which is what you've created. Let's go into like where the biofrequency patches come in and how you created this. You can even show us a little bit of what they
Yeah.
look like, and then talk about, because this is where like the snake oil stuff comes in, where people are like, I don't know if I believe in this method. But I think you've done such a good job describing the science behind it that we've got some people believing. Now let's show them like the practical, like what it would look like if they came to you and how that would kind of work out with the assessment and then also the biofrequency patches.
Okay, so the assessment, so what the neural activation screen really is doing is testing communication between the two hemispheres of your brain. Okay, so when I move my right arm, that's 30 to 40 muscles that are moving, but it's part of a hemisphere where that's connected to 300 muscles. So every pattern in the neural activation screen isn't just testing a single joint, it's testing, does that signal joint connect with 300 other muscles in your body? So every one of those, so I'm really screening your entire kinetic chain from an electrical perspective. I'm looking for short circuits in your nervous system. So I'm screening basically the connectivity between the two hemispheres in your brain. Um, and so when we move through space, all 600 muscles in our body need to basically work together. Because when I lift my right arm, it knows what my left foot is doing. Otherwise, I'd be tripping over myself. So that's the cool thing about the neural activation screen. It's screening movement at a higher level. It's screening brain function. Everybody I've treated like professional athletes. Like I've treated like everybody fails that screen because nobody has, not nobody, but like people don't do the correctives that I've developed because they're just not part of the vernacular. They're not, out there yet, but they will be. Um, but so that's one of the first things I do. I'm going to screen your movement. Then I'm going to screen your sensory perception. So one of the tests I do, and this is on my Instagram, there's a video of me testing this girl and her foot's on the floor and she had an ACL repair the year before. She'd done multiple months of rehab and she was cleared, but she was back to running and her left knee was hurting. And when I put my hand underneath her left foot and I said, hey, keep your foot on the ground like your life depends on it, I could lift her foot up with very little force. And so what was happening is if this is her foot, I push up, I can move it because she's getting bad sensory input from her foot to her brain. So she had a sluggish signal. So if you think of your body like a Wi-Fi zone or like a house, sometimes like around a certain corner, you don't get signal. Okay. It's
Yeah.
the same thing in your body. When you have an injury to the area, the swelling stretches out the joint capsule and then it alters the electrical signal between your tissue and the brain. And so for whatever reason, you don't get to have the same signal strength after the injury. So anytime somebody's had a surgical scar or a surgery, when I go and test the proprioception of that joint, it's usually terrible. And even if you did proprioceptive exercises, a lot of time that area is stuck in a compensation and it just keeps compensating. You train it, you exercise it, but you're just wiring in a compensation. You're building fitness on top of dysfunction. And that's a recipe for disaster. And so for your back, Blake, you were doing everything perfect. You were doing all the evidence-based exercises. The problem was this. Each segment of your spine, like L1, L2, L3, L4, each has its own ability to stabilize. So for you, I think it was like L3 and L5 weren't stabilizing. So that meant the other three vertebrae were pulling extra weight. And that's where you were feeling it because they were working harder because those two segments were just basically shut off. Once we brought
Yeah.
those segments back online, they started pulling their weight. The brain was like, okay, I can release this parking brake that I've set. When there's a parking brake going on up here, it basically increases the pain signal that your body's going to generate because it perceives threat. When you release that parking brake, your brain's like, hey, everything's a-okay. So your brain it's like a bus driver. It's driving this big, big machine that we call our body. If it's a bright sunny day, you can cruise down the highway going 60 miles an hour, no problem. But when you have pain or injury, it's like sheets of rain start coming down or fog sets in. You start slowing up. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
What will happen is 2-3 months later, the fog's gone, the rain's gone, but your brain doesn't know it. The glass is
Yeah.
fogged up. And so it's still driving slow. You need somebody to come in there and clean, the dew or the moisture off the window so it can say, hey, oh wow, everything's okay. And that's what the exercises and the patches that I developed do that. So what happened for that girl, when I lifted up her foot, she couldn't find her foot. All I had to do was put this patch, like this little patch has an electromagnetic field around it. Now you can't see it, you can't feel it. But when I put it on there, it has a electrical field and then basically stimulates the sensory nerves in our foot. Like we use cell phones all the time. We don't see the tiny little rays of like energy and the beams coming to our cell phone, but we know they're there. You know what I mean? So it's the same thing. This has an electromagnetic field around it, and I can put it on the injured area, and it helps your sensory nervous system find that injured joint. So the brain can say, "Oh," or say, "Okay, there's the foot, there's the knee, there's the elbow, there's the quad, there's the hamstring." It basically helps turn on the sensory input. And because the way your brain is set up, your sensory cortex and your motor cortex are linked. So when you start to improve the sensory, you stimulate the sensory cortex, it connects to the motor cortex. And that's why when I put this on people, their strength changes instantly. It's weird
Yeah.
to say that as a physical therapist because the paradigm that I was brought up in, it was like, it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. If the problem is coming from their nervous system, you can change the strength will change in a matter of seconds. It is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And like, I don't believe it, even though I see it all the time, but my patients, it's hard for them to wrap their head around it. They don't believe it. It takes 2 or 3 times I will literally put it on them, test their strength. I'll take it off them, I'll test their strength, and they'll see it's like a off and on switch. So
Yeah.
so you've experienced that.
Yeah. I'll be honest. In my experience with it, I thought you were like messing with me a little bit. The
Everybody
only reason though that like I knew it worked was I legitimately could do movements I hadn't been able to do without pain. And that was the proof. Like that was just like, oh, Jeremy's not like literally just not pushing harder this time on my leg. Right. It literally was, oh wow, I couldn't do a shrimp squat on my left leg and now I can do like 20. That's there's something that's different there. There's something that like and no pain. And right. And so it's not placebo because there's no way that that could happen. It was literally like just that the best way I could describe it as a client was it felt like I had more muscles recruited to do the work. And I was doing the work with half of those muscles on, and now I'm doing it with all of them on. So it feels much simpler, much easier, and less painful. Uh, that'd be like the easiest way. So you said this to me, and I just want to explain this, and then we're going to land the plane here. But so part of like the patches is a sensory signal one way, and the exercises, I believe, are the signal
Yeah.
back to the muscle. And so what we're trying to do in your method is really turn both like driving to and from signals to kind of create the best pathway possible. Could you explain that a little bit better than I did?
Yeah. So, I mean, you did a great job. So, in terms of like movement, when you go to move, there's an electrical signal, a program in your brain that is generating that movement, whether it's shoulder flexion or twisting your trunk. There's a pre programmed signal that you're accessing to make that happen. Before you even move, your brain's got to know where you are in space. Because if it can't find the joint or find the muscle, it can't fire it. So if it can't find it, it can't fire it. And so what the patches do is they increase the sensory signal from the tissue to the brain. So the brain's like, okay, there's the quad, there's the hamstring, there's the ankle, there's the knee. And once it knows where it's going to send that force, it can send it there better. It's almost like if you were sending a letter, but you put the wrong zip code in, or you're one digit off. It's the same thing in your body. Your brain will get a stronger signal. It will go if you can go directly, if it knows directly where to send that signal, it's going to go full bore. But if it's not sure, you kind of get this muddled signal. And so the patches, I mean, like, to me, it's almost like a comic book. It's hard for me to believe how quickly these things work, in
Yeah.
terms of improving strength and function. It's, I mean, it's the most revolutionary thing I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of different things. I've studied a lot of different systems, um, and it's been eye opening, and this is the most excited thing or the thing I've been most excited about in my whole career. And I've done some really cool things, but
Yeah.
I can see what the next 20 years of my life are going to be like, and this is making my life and my job so much easier. Anyway,
Sure. How would you summarize what the method is in one sentence? Like, how would you do that? Let's land
uh,
there, and then I'll
okay.
talk
So
about how
how do I
people
summarize the
find.
Baber method? So my tagline is this: train the brain, fix your pain, because
Yeah.
the brain is the number one pain generating structure in the body. So if that's what's really generates pain, you have to start there. I mean, you don't have to, but you should. And so I've been able to help a lot of people who've struggled, um, with chronic pain, because nobody had taken the time to assess their software system. Nobody looked at their brain. Nobody looked at their spinal cord from an objective measure. And so I've developed so many objective tests of brain function, motor function, and, like, if I had gone and done a standard orthopedic therapy assessment, most of those people are gonna fly with passing colors. When I put people
Yeah.
through my screen, where I'm screening their nervous system and their sensory processing, I don't say they always fail, but they usually fail, because it tells me right then, I'm like, this is a big player in their problem. And I don't need 4 to 6 weeks to, like, know if I'm gonna help somebody. We'll know within the first 2 or 3 sessions if they're gonna respond. If you are early responder, 2 or 3 sessions, then I'd say there's a good chance the problem is in your software. If you're not responding within 2 or 3 sessions, I'm gonna say, "Hey, you probably have some sort of hardware issue." I would probably direct you, to another practitioner. But um, I hope, does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. No, really well said. I'll just say this as a testimonial, and then we'll talk about where people can reach out to you. So, like, all of last year, I had this back issue where I just couldn't deadlift. If I did, I could barely go 50%. I was in constant pain. I woke up in the middle of the night with back pain every night. Caused I just thought it was getting close to 40, and this is what the former athletes feel like. If you want to keep working out, it just feels like pain. And so I kind of had started to accept that. I had a client who had a lot of uh, back issues, and he went to you and he swore by it. And the only reason I believe this is because I had done everything I could with him, and I knew that he had gone to other physical therapists. His sister was a physical therapist, and so he just swore by it. So I was like, what the heck? I'll go try it. And within the first session, I was responding so well. I think that week I went and deadlifted more than I had in like a year without pain. I came back. There were still some things I needed to work through, but I think within 3 sessions, I felt great. After six, I was just like, I was doing things I didn't think I could do again. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate your hard work and all the time you've put in. And I'm committed to sending as many people to you as possible just because I think it really works. So, where can people find you?
Well, right now I'm having a website built, but if they want to find me, they can go on Instagram. It's at Baber, Baber method. And same thing on Facebook, at Baber method. And my website will be babermethod.com, and hopefully that'll be up in the next month or so. But if they need to reach out to me, my phone number is, well, it's on my Instagram. So if you click on the contact, my contact info is there, my email, and my cell phone. So one like thing in closing is, like, everybody's had, like, problems with their phone or their computer. So if you go to Geek Squad, or if you go to the Apple Store, the first thing they're going to have you do before you show up in the store is what?
Software.
Upgrade the software.
Yeah.
The reason why I'm able to help people faster than most therapists is that the first thing I do on that first
Yeah.
session is upgrade your operating system. Does that ever happen in physical therapy? Sometimes, in a slow way. But, like, what I do is I basically help you download the specific drivers for specific parts of your brain that make movement happen, and that's why the changes happen so fast. is that
Yeah.
most physical therapists are treating their problem. 90% are treating everything as as a hardware problem. But when it comes to being a chronic pain issue, something you have 6 months, a year or longer, 80% of the time it's a neurological issue that needs to be basically addressed with a neurological based approach. And that's basically what I have done. I've basically created a neurological approach to orthopedic problems.
I love that. I'll make sure everything is attached in the notes, both on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, and you guys can reach out to Jeremy there. Jeremy, thanks so much for coming on today. We appreciate it. And if you're looking for any solution to get out of pain, this is your guy. If you're local in Lakeland,
Blake, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
yes, sir.